Good morning, everyone. Welcome. So I'd like to officially welcome everybody to our StoryFest Saturday, and welcome back if you were here last night. To kick off our StoryFest Saturday this year, we have a killer panel of thriller writers. Hold on to your seat, because this morning we welcome Cobb, author of My Summer Darlings. Yep. Gabino Iglesias, author of The Devil Takes You Home. Lynne Constantine, one half of the Liv Constantine books, including The Stranger in the Mirror. Greg Galloway, author of Just Thieves. And Bracken MacLeod, whose latest book is Closing Costs. And this panel will be moderated this morning by our program director at the library, Alex Giannini. Enjoy.
How many in so I can make a quick getaway?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. For everybody who was here last night, I think we can all agree that energy, there's something cool about the energy this year, so I will try not to kill that energy on this panel. Thank you guys for being here. StoryFest, our big tagline is that we're a celebration of reading, writing, ideas, and community. So that's kind of how I'm going to lead these questions. We're going to use those as our topics, okay? So let's start with the basics. We're here this weekend to celebrate storytellers from across genre and media. Who are some of your favorite storytellers?
Well, I mean, shit, we could be here all day.
That's fine.
You know, there's such a long list. It's, you know, I think the thing that I love best is reading sort of outside of genre to find inspiration for genre. So my favorite storytellers are writers like Cormac McCarthy and Margaret Atwood. But then my favorite like thriller writers are well, Jack Ketchum. He's more of a horror writer, but he's in the secular vein like I am. So very little supernatural stuff. But those are the people that kind of inspire me, you know, to work harder, because every time I read their, you know, something that they do, it feels like you're getting kind of hit, you know.
Jump around?
Yeah, just go down.
Okay. So Patricia Highsmith is one of my favorites. Also, a lot of contemporary, newer authors. Jennifer Hillier, I love her. Alice Feeney, Wendy Walker. I could go on and on and on.
I'm going to keep it extremely simple. First of all, because I like to talk about living writers, because those are the ones that need you to buy their books to pay the rent. So support living writers. And also because some of them are here. So Paul Tremblay's around here. Everybody at this table. Alma Katsu, who's sitting right here on this table. And also Clay's sitting here. If you go through the back of the program, there's a whole bunch of, John Langan is somewhere around here. He's a master at what he does. And I'm kind of like Bracken. I like to read poetry from time to time. I like to review literary fiction to see what's going on. And I like to read a lot of nonfiction because it all kind of like inspires me to keep doing things differently. So turn to the back of your program and read all of those folks.
Yeah, no, this guest list is an embarrassment of riches.
I wholeheartedly second what Gabino just said, and I actually had the privilege of doing Gabino's book launch with him in Austin, and y'all all really need to buy The Devil Takes You Home if you want to go on a journey and also be terrified to go to sleep at night. Yeah, there's so many great crime fiction writers, and a lot of them are here. One of my favorite authors, though he's more literary, is Luis Alberto Urrea. That's really what made me want to be a writer, was reading his work. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. One of the things that I try to do in my book is it has a lot of allusions and direct references to other writers. So there's quotes lifted from everybody from Raymond Chandler to Dashiell Hammett to George Simenon to Dorothy Hughes. And those are sort of people I look to, and then also try to read diversely. I actually studied poetry writing when I was in college, so I read a lot of poetry, everybody from Anne Lauterbach to Jory Graham, John Ashbery, as well as a lot of nonfiction. Loved this book by Alec Navala-Lee, which was about the start of Astounding Magazine, where he goes through sort of the key figures in science fiction in a very interesting and compelling way. You know, we live really in an embarrassment of riches where there's great storytellers, you know, in this room, outside these walls, all along these shelves, and it's sort of, you know, it's hard to go wrong as long as you cast your net very widely.
One of the hard parts about and one of the awesome parts about putting together panels for StoryFest specifically is it's tough to, I mean, like, Gabino, you could be on 4 panels, right? Because you guys everyone kind of writes across genres and right. Reads everyone, right? So I'm going to keep this question thriller specific, and if we could, there are a lot of writers out there. Let's talk a little bit about process. So with thrillers, I know you get it all the time, but do you know the twist before you start writing? Is that where you start? Are you plotters or are you pantsers? So who wants to start? How about May? Why don't you start?
Yeah, I usually just have to have the situation or the setup. And beyond that, I don't like to know that much more about it because I very much subscribe to the Stephen King school of a story is like a buried artifact, and your job is to excavate it as, you know, cleanly and wholly as possible. So I really trust that the story is smarter than me and it will be revealed. And when I try to outline, it's just a big mess and I'm lying to myself because I can't stick to a path. So.
I'll jump in because I'm the exact opposite. I'm a meticulous plotter. I got it from, despite appearances, my former life, I was a lawyer. And when I would go to court to try a case, I would have to have a litigation binder. And everything that I was going to do in that case was in the litigation binder. So tab A was my opening statement. Tab B was every question that I was going to ask, you know, my first witness, and every answer that I expected them to give. I never asked a question I didn't know the answer to. And that's how I approach writing a book. Is I have a long outline, usually between 16 and 20 pages. That is the entire book before I ever write the first line. Because I want to explore the emotional experiences of the characters. And if I don't know where we're headed, then I'm focused on trying to find the next event as opposed to how they feel about the event. So that's my process. And there's no right or wrong. That's just how it works for me. I tried to pants a book once, and it was an unmitigated disaster.
So that was my question. I was going to say, you did. Do you find joy in the plotting, though, in that?
I do. Oh, yeah. No, it feels like setting a stage. You know, and so it feels like, you know, kind of like stage building. You know, you're doing a play, and I'm erecting the walls, and I'm seeing everything come to life as I'm putting it together. And then when I write the book, that's the performance. And so, yeah, no, I find it really invigorating. And I know other people are just like, they finish an outline, and they're just like, well, I told that story. I'm done now. But I feel like that's just the rehearsal. That's me getting ready for the show.
I'll go next because I'm in the middle of both of you. Valerie and I call ourselves plantsers. A little bit of plotting, a little bit of pantsing. We do know the twist generally with most of that's how the book starts. We talk about a situation and then we build the characters. And then we have a general sense of what's going to happen, but we do allow different plot twists, you know, to go and to change along the way. And we've even had one of our books where the killer changed in the second revision. So. We try to make it more character-driven, but again, we have somewhat of a plan because I can't just sit down and write with nothing either.
Yeah, no, my outlines change as things go on, and I go, oh no, that was a terrible idea.
Right.
Right, and so I have to fix it. Yeah. I'm not a big fan of twists. I like escalating trouble, right? Cascading danger. You know, that just kind of, all of my characters are standing in a hole on the first page, and they just keep digging. You know.
Cascading Danger is a good nickname for Bracken MacLeod.
I tried to outline once, and it was a total disaster. I try to be as dumb as I possibly can, which is remarkably easy for me, and really have no idea where anything's headed, which I think there are some reviewers who will say, yes, that's exactly what happens. And, you know, basically I start with character and just try to get to a point where they're leading me, and, you know, when it's successful, they're sort of leading me, but I never have any idea of what's gonna happen from page to page, which is not a technique I recommend at all. But you know, what happens is I usually end up writing the beginning of the novel at the end.
I don't like rules, so I never liked the idea of like the twist. Just like I don't like the whole, you need an inciting incident at the beginning. You need one in every chapter if you can pull it off. So I like twists that happen in the middle. When I started reading as a young kid, I was like, wow, authors sit down and they have an idea, and then they write the first word, and then they keep going all the way to the end, and then they have a book. That's awesome. So now that I've learned, I'm a huge fan of like reverse engineering. So I have a story, and I try to get it out, and then I'll go in and I'll find spaces to do things. I once tried to outline, and then I ran out and punched my neighbor. Didn't turn out quite well. Which is how Bracken and I met. He was my defense lawyer. So he's the reason I'm here today. This is why I love him to death. And it was such a complicated case that he actually quit. And he's like, I don't like making money. I want to be a writer.
Gabino was my career killer. I'm like, I can't do this anymore.
So my apologies, but now you have his books. You can thank me for that. Yeah, I have an idea, and there's an amazing novelist. His name's David Joy, and I talked to him once during an event, and he said he might not write for a year, but he's thinking about that novel all day, every day, and then when he's ready, he sits down. I think I do a little bit of that. Like I've been thinking about the next novel for about maybe 3 years, like in bits and pieces, and I haven't written down a single word yet. But it's kind of like a plot, you know, outline. It's in there. At some point, I'll yank it out, and it'll look entirely different. And I like that process, because if you can surprise yourself, then you're probably going to surprise your readers too. Or at least you hope so.
That was Andrew Vax's process. The crime writer Andrew Vax. He told me that he would just think about a novel, and he would start writing it when the entire thing was complete in his head. I think it helped that he probably had an eidetic memory, you know, and so he could sit down and think of an entire novel, and it would be, you know, the entire thing would be in his head if you're lucky enough to be able to hold all of that at once. That was his process.
Lynne, you'd mentioned writing with your sister, so I want to talk a little bit about that and collaboration. So how does that work with you guys? How do you go about it?
I write the whole thing, and she just takes credit for half of it, essentially. No, it's obviously very collaborative. We do a lot of talking, sort of similar to what you're saying. It's maybe a month or two before we write the first word, and we're either FaceTiming or, you know, on Zoom, and we're discussing the characters, and we're building them and developing them. And that's really the most difficult part. But we're always asked, you know, do you ever fight, or and we don't, but at the beginning we do, because that's when we're ironing it out, and we may have a different idea of ways, you know, of which direction the story should take. So once we have settled on kind of the basics, then we start the actual writing process. And what happens is we'll talk every morning, and we'll say, okay, I'm gonna write this scene, you write that scene, and then we email each other. And quite often, it really has evolved, because with The Last Mrs. Parrish, we took a character each, even though we each wrote in that as well. And then we realized we had to be fully invested in every character. And so we wrote just alternating chapters. Now, even I'll write a half a chapter and say, okay, I'm bored, do you want to finish this? She'll be like, oh, great, yeah, it's already started, and vice versa. And then other sort of things, like she likes description. I really don't like describing things, and so I'll say, describe this living room, I'll put all in, I'll give her stage direction, I'll send it to her, and it'll come back all finished, or she'll say, punch the dialogue up. So by the time the book is finished, it's not uncommon for a sentence to be half of hers and half of mine. And then, of course, anything that somebody made a reviewer will pull out and say is a really great line, we both take credit for. So.
I was going to ask, I co-wrote a novella with somebody, and we got to a place where we couldn't remember who wrote which line. Do you get there?
Occasionally, occasionally we do. And then, there are certain things that we'll both, like I said, we'll both think we'll take credit for a certain idea. So we've just come to say, you know what, it's half and half, it's all of us. But it really does work well. And I think because we're sisters and we have similar senses of humor and styles, it's easier also to meld the writing. But definitely a lot of it happens, in revision. So our hope is, and we do a lot of times hear, oh, it didn't seem like two people, which is what we want it to be, of course.
So you can tell Bracken is also a kick-ass moderator, because that was my next question about how we broke. But I wonder, so did you and Paul Michael Anderson get into fights when you were writing that novel?
Our biggest fight when we were writing that novella was whether it was soda or pop. Because he's a dirty, dirty Pennsylvanian, and I live in New England. And so it's, if it's not tonic, it's soda. But no, we didn't get into fights. But we did sort of have to collaborate and say, well, I don't think that character would do that. Like, they would go in this direction, and we would sort of bounce back and forth our ideas of who these people were. And what she said is exactly true. We started out thinking, I'm going to inhabit this character, you're going to inhabit that character, and we're going to co-write this. And then we realized that we had to be deep in the mind space of both characters. So when we were back and forth writing, we could react honestly as each one of them. But yeah, it was a fun experience collaborating with him, because we have very similar styles, although we have very different methods, because he's a pantser. And so I'm like, all right, Paul, it's time to outline. And he's like, oh, don't make me, Dad. So, yeah.
And Gabino, you work as an editor as well, and that's a different kind of collaboration. So I'm wondering, how do you approach that collaboration?
We were having this conversation on our way here. Even your editor needs an editor. It's not a collaboration because I don't want to alter anything. So I try to identify the voice of the book first, or the essay collection, and then try to do everything in my power to not touch it. Like, writers work so hard on developing their own voice. And then I take away everything that's good and awesome and works really well, and I don't have to touch that. And then I identify the spaces where I know the author could do better. And I think I've been very lucky that each one of my editors has been just like that. So you identify the things that work, let them be, and then you find not necessarily flaws, because you can get a line editor for grammar, and you suck at the use of commas or whatever, but the editor sees exactly what you were trying to do, so they have to get in your head, and then they have to say, like, all right, so this is the stuff that you managed to pull off, and here's where I know you have the chops to go even harder, quicker, do more character development. So it's kind of like a collaboration in the sense that you have a great idea, I like what you're doing, now let's try to make it go from 10 to like 12.
And I have a May-specific question, but first, just kind of on that note, do you have, for all of you, is there advice for pitching a thriller for aspiring writers?
I mean, the best piece of advice I can give is to revise it as many times as you can before you pitch it, and if you're able to hire a freelance, with a good recommendation, a freelance editor, that's the best thing. If not, if you can find somebody that you trust, not to just tell you that it's good because they're your friend, but who can really help to point out those types of things that you were saying. Because I think when you're writing, you're so close to it, you can't always see, you know certain things about the character that may never make it on the page, and you assume the reader knows, and a good editor is going to look at that and say, well, I'm confused, or again, you could tighten this up or tighten that up. So I think the biggest mistake people make is to submit too quickly. They have the talent and they have a good book, but it's not ready. And publishing today is ruthless. I mean, they don't have time. Agents don't have time to help you make your book better. Publishers, I mean, yes, they're going to edit it, but it has to be in pristine shape. So that would be.
No, I'm wicked lucky, and I have an old school editor who's been selling books as long as I've been alive. And so he helps, we collaborate, and I send him a manuscript, and he's like, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. Actually, in the new book, in closing costs, he kept asking me why the characters were such assholes. And I had to explain to him that I based them on me and my wife. And, and so he had notes about them that I was just kind of like, eh. But yeah, if you're lucky and you find an editor who will work with you, that's great, but that's a rarity. Yeah, most of them want finished, saleable product. So in terms of getting a reader, you're absolutely right too. Like, your friends are gonna be kind to you. But also, the flip side of that is avoid people who are going to come at you with brutal honesty. Brutal honesty isn't helpful. Constructive honesty is helpful. If somebody's just gonna, gonna rip you apart and make you feel bad about the work, that's not really putting you in a headspace to make the work better, right? So that's where the professional editors come in, because they have that kind of constructive goal, right?
So actually, May, just about a year ago, we were talking about Hunting Wives, right? And I asked you a question about writing female characters, and I want to talk to you and Lynne about this a little bit. And the basic premise of my question was, if you write a male protagonist who's kind of a jerk, right? He's seen as kind of a badass, but sometimes that is problematic when you write a female character with some problems as a protagonist, right? So I wonder if your position has changed at all in the last year.
Yeah, it's crazy. So when my novel, The Hunting Wives, what Alex is referring to, came out, I knew I had written some complicated female characters, and some of them are maybe downright unsavory, but I honestly was not prepared for sort of some of the backlash, because the whole notion of likability is rarely discussed when you talk about male characters. And so I'm like, wait, so my women can't like just have lust and do things that maybe a man would. Like, if a man's having an affair, it's like, oh yeah, of course the secretary's hot, but if it's a woman, I got more backlash for the affair than the actual murder. And I find that so telling. Having said that, my next book that's coming out next summer is called A Likeable Woman. And for sure, she's my most likable character, but not in like a popcorn way. She still does stuff that I'm getting feedback about now that it's not likable, so maybe she's not likable. I don't know. But I don't want to read about, I love Mary Poppins the movie, but I don't want to read that in crime fiction. So I'm just always baffled when people are baffled by crazy female characters. It's like, let us be wild. Anyway, I don't know if that answers the question. Totally. I could really go on a rant, and I'm going to put the microphone down.
I think Gone Girl changed a lot of the landscape with that, where we finally had a strong female character, maybe not likable, but certainly fascinating and intriguing. And I agree with May. I mean, if you're reading a certain genre, then maybe you do want that woman who's perfect and doing everything, cooking and being faithful. But when you're reading psychological thrillers, you want raw characters and women who are authentic and who are not always the best. I mean, and if I think of our characters, I think our most knowable character is Amber Patterson, who is the most despicable, horrible person, but she's fascinating and she's funny and she's smart. She's not the protagonist, but she's, like I said, she's the one who really makes, I think, you want to turn those pages initially. So I think likability is not important. I think what's important is authenticity and, a character who's deeply layered, and because who of us is perfect, and right? I mean, so I don't think we want to read about perfect people, and hopefully I think that stereotype with women is, I mean, I don't know. I agree with May about the sex part. You can have a guy, like a Reacher character, or what I don't know if he sleeps around a lot, but probably like the macho male guys do. I don't know that. I do think you can get more criticism for the woman like that, but hopefully, we can start to just look at characters as people and.
Next question, I want to talk, because somebody mentioned that publishing is just rough today, right? So I want to actually start with Greg and then open it up to the rest of the group, because I think it's interesting. When Simple as Snow came out in 2005, and then your latest book came out last year, what's some of the biggest differences in the industry that you see? Totally softball question.
I think the biggest shift is sort of the work that is put on the shoulders of the author. And that's everything from, you know, the lack of sort of line editing at some of the big houses. I mean, there's just been so many mergers and acquisitions that the lists have gotten so huge that every department stayed the same. They just have an overwhelming number of titles they have to deal with. So the work sort of gets shoved back to the authors, and that's, you know, that's marketing, that's almost every aspect you can think of. I think that recently there's been a nice shift away from, you know, maybe 3-5 years ago, there was a big thing about platform. You know, they were really interested in how many Twitter followers you had, and that seems to at least been diminished, and it's more about the quality of the work. But, you know, I think the job as the author, it requires a lot more investment in other things that we may not have the skill set for other than writing, and that is, you know, figuring out your marketing campaign and your publicity campaign, and, you know, how are you going to get above the, you know, the clutter of literally, you know, I think it's like 500 books being published a day. So it's like, you know, it's just insane. I think the other advantage since 2005 is while the mergers and acquisitions are going on, there is a rise of independent publishers, which is, and you know, those houses, I think are sort of trying to be very old school, which is offer the services that large houses are you know, really not doing anymore. And then, you know, I think that's probably the biggest difference that I've seen over that part. You know, there was also a period where, you know, I think I successfully wrote myself out of being published. You know, it's like, had 2 novels that really no one was interested in, you know, and had an editor say, this is literally the best book I've read all year, and no one will buy this book. And it's like, you know, as a author, you know it's a business, but it's still sort of devastating to sort of have it sort of put in very stark terms.
I was going to say, I mean, that's kind of the hard truth that you learn, is that, you know, you want to believe that every publisher believes in literature as art, and they're committed fully to your expression and to enriching the you know, the body of literature. But it's a business, and they want to sell books, and if your books don't sell the way they think they ought to, which of course is even more problematic now with COVID and shutdowns and paper shortages and all of that. You know, it's harder, I think, to have a longevity in this business when what they're looking at is bottom line instead of nurturing you as a writer. I mean, what was it? I saw an article recently where it was like, you know, when, you know, in the 80s, 90s, you know, they would nurture an author, and if your first book wasn't a huge hit, they would just keep working so that eventually you became bestseller status, and they don't do that anymore.
For Gabino and Bracken, I guess specifically because you guys both work across genres, and I'm wondering if that ever gets you in trouble, because it's, you know, you can't pin you down, either one of you as a thriller writer or a horror writer. So if you want to speak to that a little bit, and then we're going to open it up to audience questions in just a second.
I get in trouble for a lot of things. This is just one of them. When Serial Saints came out back in 2015, I heard from folks who were, they were trying to be constructive, as Bracken was saying. They were saying, like, listen, if you have the violence and the gangs and the crime happening and the guns, don't put the supernatural stuff in there, because then it stops being crime fiction. It's not noir anymore. It's a horror book. And then from the horror side, folks were saying, give us like the demonic possession and the spirits and the dark stuff. Get the gangs and the drugs and the guns and the violence out of there. I ignored them then, and I ignore them now. Genre is for librarians, because they need to put your book somewhere, and for marketing folks. And so when I'm writing, I take the elements that I love from horror fiction, the elements that I love from thrillers and noirs and mysteries, and then all the stuff that I love from like magical realism. And, you know, folks will send you hate mail. So I found a trick. Put Spanish in there, because that makes everybody angry. And they forget about the genre mixing. And with this one, I threw in just a little bit of like child mutilation. And all the soccer moms that got the book through a Book of the Month Club were really angry, and no one talked about genre. So you know, you find ways of pissing them off differently.
No, he's absolutely right. The more offensive material you can put in a book, the less people focus on what kind of book they're reading. You know, because I've bounced back and forth between I've done a sci-fi thriller, a straight-up horror novel. 3 of my books are what I call secular thrillers. So, you know, there's more Silence of the Lambs psychological thriller type storytelling. And you know, and what I want, you know, sort of my model for my identity as a writer is Joe Lansdale, right? And it's not style. We don't have anything stylistically in common, really. But when Joe puts out a Western and then follows it up with a crime novel and follows it up with a comedy novel, no one is ever like, Joe, really? They just go, oh, a new Joe Lansdale. And that's kind of what I want for my career, is if I put out, you know, this home invasion thriller and then follow it up with, you know, with sort of a slow burn mystery. No one says, oh, but he's, you know, an action writer. It's like I just want them to say, oh, a new Bracken MacLeod novel. And, you know, and it does make it difficult because my agent wants me to, you know, to do what he thinks I'm best at, which is this sort of thing. You know, and so I do my best to kind of please him because he's selling the books. But I'm not tailoring the book to his interests. I'm writing the book I want to write, and you know, because you know, it's like, who do you work for, Howard, right? But yeah, no, it is interesting because you know, it gets you in trouble. If you sold 3 books as a thriller writer and then you come out with a horror book, they're going to be like, no, he's not a horror writer, he's a thriller writer, you know. And so you just have to have that expectation of this person can write across genres successfully in order to be able to do it. You know, it's earned.
It's interesting that you say that because even if you're staying within the genre, our editor for our last book, we had at the end, we had this mummified body in it, and she's like, no, you know, your readers are not gonna, they're not gonna go for that. You have to change this ending. You know, and so we did, but I wonder, you know, there are times, though, I wonder if we should have, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, the 1-star reviews I get for my book is that people aren't expecting the violence to be portrayed in the way I portray it, which is that I really, really hate the idea of heroic violence, of, you know, John McClane goes in and he slaughters 20 people, doesn't get a drop of blood on him, there are no consequences whatsoever. It should always be frightening and unpleasant to read about a violent act, because that's what it's really like. But every once in a while, you know, I'll get somebody who was expecting something cozier or more sanitized, more, you know, Saturday afternoon action. And, you know, and they're displeased. But the point to take away from that is you cannot write for everyone. You write the book you want to read, and there will be readers who find you.
And if all else fails, child mutilation.
And if, yeah,
Why not?
Right. So, thank God we have a pull quote for the festival. Gabino, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I want to open up to questions. If you guys have questions for our wonderful panel, there's a microphone right there by that pillar. So if you have questions, we can line up there to do that, and we'll go from there. We've got Gabby first. Thank you, Gabby.
Well, I've been sitting here thinking that a number of you have a series of thrillers that you've written, and I know that when you have a successful thriller, your publishers and your agents want you to write more of those. You've just explained that. But I wonder whether any of you have a secret yen to write something completely different, like a cookbook or a romance.
I desperately want to write a literary novel, right? And just sort of explore, you know, someone's interior emotional life without child mutilations and all of that. I feel like it's in me somewhere, but my agent will absolutely just murder me if I send him that manuscript, because that's not how I'm positioned. I suppose if I did it and we publish it, I'd probably have to publish it under a pseudonym. Yeah. And when your name is Bracken MacLeod, like, who the hell wants to be John Smith? So, all apologies to any John Smiths in the audience.
Nice. I don't know if it's necessarily a different genre. I mean, I would like to do maybe something a little more sci-fi or time travel potentially. And as you know, Gabby. I write more conspiracy thrillers already under a pseudonym. Neither of my author names are my real name, so I don't know, maybe eventually I could write one under that. That might be good.
Next question.
Yeah. I was just wondering, as you go, who, if anyone, reads your books?
Oh, you don't mean as an audience. You mean, yeah.
Your friend, your wife,
Right, okay. My husband has to read all of my books, even though they're not necessarily the genre that he would, but he reads them, and I have good friends who read them that are here. I have Trisha and Jeff, they're in the audience right now. So I have a core of friends, and our sisters-in-law read them too.
I'm so glad that wasn't the sickest burn of the festival, by the way.
Yeah, my wife is my first reader, my best reader. She's my ideal reader because she's not a writer. She likes the kind of stories I tell, and she's honest with me about when something doesn't work. She calls me on the places where I stumble. So yeah, no, my wife Heather usually reads everything that I do before it goes to anyone else because I trust her judgment. I respect it.
Next question.
What are some tricks and techniques that you guys use to keep the excitement and the thrill and the energy going through a thriller?
Short chapters. Yeah, I really, and I sometimes get pushback for those, like, this could be longer or we could combine these two. And I'm like, I don't know what universe you live in, but we're in the universe of like TikTok and Instagram. And I've had so many readers say we so appreciate the short chapters. And I'm like, yes, tired middle-aged mothers of the world unite, because no one has time for it. But God bless beautiful long chapters. I'm not up here dunking on those, but that's my little gimmick. It's worked so far, I don't know. And, little cliffhangers at the end. And then she,
And then murder.
And then, yeah. Oh, yeah. Lots of murder, child mutilation.
I tend to think of every chapter as a short story. And so every chapter, even though the book has a beginning, middle, and end, every chapter has a beginning, middle, and end. And when you get to the end of that chapter, you should be at a point in the story where you want to know more, but you've had a satisfying experience in that moment. The other thing I think is that rhythm of language is really important, and to keep anxiety high. So like at the beginning of a chapter, if I'm setting a scene, I'll write long sentences, but I craft them sort of poetically so that they're not boring. But when you get to the end of the chapter and things are starting to blow up, they're punchier, they're shorter, they're much more sort of Hemingway-esque, very direct and not uncomplicated, because I think the variation from long, complicated sentences to really short, punchy sentences affects the way the reader feels as they're reading. It's manipulative.
I think George Saunders had like the best advice, which is you write your very best sentence as your first sentence, and then the second sentence better than that.
Next question.
All right. Obviously, it's not a sane profession. What was the moment or the thing that made you say, this is what I want to do? And how did you start doing it?
That's a great question.
My mother says when I was 4 years old, I walked into a crowded room in the house and announced that I was going to move to New York City and be a writer and a button collector. And I've spent the majority of my life wondering if I shouldn't have been the button collector.
Thank you for kicking it off with childhood. English is not my first language, so as I was starting to learn English, I was probably 10 or 11, and I was taking some classes. And we were supposed to write a short story to, get tenses right and all that stuff. And obviously I wrote about a lady in my neighborhood who had a deformed, mutated son, and she locked him up in a basement. He just grew and grew and grew, and one day he broke out and destroyed the neighborhood and killed half of the people. I didn't have any lawyer friends at the time, so I didn't know you were supposed to change names. So I murdered half of the school, and they called in the psychologist. And then my pops, yeah, my pops had to go to the school. And the lady sat there and told him about, like, you know, beheadings and murder and mutated babies. And at the end of the whole thing, my dad looked at her and he said, okay, but was it well written? And at that time I said, this is what I want to do the rest of my life.
Okay, we had 2 more questions.
Okay, so quickly, somebody said, write the book that you want to read, and the joke is always because you're going to have to read it 400 times. When do you know that you're finished? Because your inner critic is going to keep you just trying to improve.
I'm finished with a book when I absolutely hate it, and I cannot stand to look at it for 1 second longer. Now, of course, what you just said is absolutely true. What they don't tell you is that when you sell the book, you're going to read it 10 more times, because you've got your line edit, and then or content edit, and then a line edit, and then, you know, typesetting. You got to make sure you find all of the typos that the typesetting process introduces to your manuscript, right? And so, yeah, I know I'm done with a book when the editing feels like hard labor. Stephen King said, you know, sometimes you just got to do even if it feels like shoveling shit from a seated position, you just got to do the work. But I take that as when it feels like that, that's when I need to bring in someone else to look at it, because I'm no longer objective about it. I've entered a hostile relationship with it.
And our last question.
Hello. This is specifically for Gabino.
Yes.
In The Devil Takes You Home, it's written, a good chunk of it is in Spanish. Yeah. And you said you got backlash for that. What made you decide to make most of it in Spanish? And I liked it. I was okay with the Spanish.
Well, you're here, so that kind of tells me that you love books anyway, so shout out to you. In 2015, I was doing that process of looking for my voice, and then I realized, well, the thing is out now, so I can talk about it. A couple months ago, I was sitting down with the freaking New York Times to do an interview, and we're talking there, and I'm talking about my grandma, and I'm telling the journalist this story about she always had a pack of dogs, so when I scraped my knee, you know, come here, let the dogs that, you know, they lick themselves. Let the dogs lick your wounds, because they have some healing stuff in their saliva. So I had that type of grandma. And I wanted to let them know that she used that instead of oxygen peroxide. Now, in my bilingual mind, I remembered aoxygenada, and I could not remember peroxide. So that's my reality every single day. So when my characters inhabit the same reality and we share that positionality in life, I know that when they talk to their mom, it's in Spanish. When they pray to their gods, it's in Spanish. When they say the F word, it's in their language. So I was like, I'm not going to throw authenticity out of the window just because I have to write for these characters. So yeah, I looked around and I said, I'm in Texas. I'm a brown dude in Texas from the Caribbean, writing about my people, writing about not only, you know, folks from the Caribbean and Mexico, but also everyone underneath Mexico. I'm not going to translate the whole thing. If someone reads the book and they feel slightly uncomfortable, I look at them and I say, welcome to our lives. This is our reality every single day. And also, this is the United States of America. It's about time everybody learns a little Spanish.
20% of people in the United States speak Spanish as a first language. It reminds me of that Junot Diaz line, which is that suckers will read a book that's half in Elvish, but if you put a Spanish line in there, they think we're taking over. You know, and I just, yeah, and I love, you know, he has other books that are indie press, smaller press books that are amazing that you need to check out, but they've got that same smattering of Spanish in it, and it adds such a verisimilitude, man. I love your work.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping me out of prison.
I mean, how could we go out on a better note than that?
Another quote.
So, thank you all. I mean, one of the best things about this festival for me is that it's so self-serving. I get to hang out with you guys. So, thank you for this. Love your work. Thank you. Everybody, thank you for coming. Go buy books in the bookstore. Author signing to follow at the Step and Repeat over there. Thank you all.